This wasn't a war, this wasn't a bomb, and yet, in a single instant, it tore through a city like a nuclear blast. Windows shattered 10 kilometers away, buildings collapsed, over 200 people were killed, 300,000 lost their homes, and the crater it left behind was wider than a football field. But what if I told you, this entire explosion was caused by something sitting silently in a warehouse for 6 years and everyone in power knew it was there? This is not just a disaster, it's one of the greatest failures of government accountability in modern history, and what went wrong isn't just shocking, it's criminal. On August 4, 2020, at exactly 6:08 p.m. local time stopped for the city of Beirut. In one violent instant, the city was rocked by an explosion so massive, so devastating, and so sudden it was described as feeling like an atomic bomb had detonated in the heart of the Lebanese capital. The images were surreal. A mushroom cloud rising into the sky, shockwaves ripping through buildings, streets filled with shattered glass and dust. More than 200 people dead, over 6,000 injured, hundreds of thousands homeless, and a crater more than 140 meters wide carved into the port. But this wasn't a natural disaster. It wasn't an act of war. It was a failure and explosive consequence of corruption, negligence, and the deadly price of political dysfunction. This is not just a story of an explosion, it's the story of years of warnings ignored, decisions deferred, and lives gambled with. This is the story of what went wrong. The silent bomb at the heart of a rough blast that destroyed Beirut wasn't from a missile or a terrorist attack. It came from something far more mundane and far more terrifying. The cause was 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate, a highly explosive compound used in both fertilizer and industrial explosives. Back in 2013, a Russian-owned ship called the MV Rosas made an unscheduled stop at the port of Beirut due to mechanical issues. It was en route to Mozambique, carrying that massive cargo of ammonium nitrate, but when the ship's owners abandoned it, and the Lebanese authorities impounded it, the cargo was transferred into Warehouse 12, a facility located right next to the heart of the city. For the next 6 years, that deadly cargo sat there, unsecured, and monitored, forgotten. Except it wasn't really forgotten. Over the years, officials, customs officers, port authorities, even members of the judiciary sent at least 6 separate letters warning of the danger. They pleaded for the material to be moved, sold, exported, or destroyed. Nothing happened. The ammonium nitrate was stored in a poorly ventilated hangar in the middle of a port surrounded by fireworks, tires, and other flammable materials. A disaster waiting to happen. And yet, no one acted. Why? The anatomy of negligence. To understand what went wrong, you have to understand the system. Lebanon's political structure is a complex, sectarian-based power-sharing system designed to prevent domination by any one group. But in practice, it often leads to gridlock, nepotism, and a refusal to take responsibility. At the port of Beirut, this dysfunction was on full display. The port is not run by a single authority. Instead, it is managed by a tangled web of overlapping agencies, each tied to different political factions. No one person has full control. Everyone shares power, which means, in the end, no one is accountable. So when warnings were sent, they disappeared into this bureaucratic black hole. Some judges claimed they didn't have the jurisdiction to approve removal. Others said they were awaiting further assessments. In reality, the cargo became a ticking time bomb, with everyone too afraid or too indifferent to take action. And then, on that summer afternoon in 2020, that bomb went off. The explosion heard around the world at around 5:55 p.m. A fire broke out in Warehouse 12. Videos posted on social media show thick plumes of gray smoke rising from the port. Firefighters were dispatched, and beknownst to them, they were walking into a death trap. Moments later, the first blast. Then, 33 seconds later, a second explosion, one of the most powerful non-nuclear blasts ever recorded. The shockwave rippled across Beirut with horrifying force. Buildings collapsed, glass shattered in a radius of over 10 kilometers. People were thrown off their feet. Cars were hurled across highways. Windows were blown out as far away as the airport. The seismic impact of the explosion was equivalent to a 3.3 magnitude earthquake, and the sound was heard more than 150 miles away, even on the island of Cyprus. In a split second, a city already reeling from economic collapse, COVID-19, and political unrest was plunged into chaos. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Streets were littered with wounded civilians. Entire neighborhoods, Gemeza, Mar Mikhol, Karantina, were decimated. The Lebanese Red Cross called it a catastrophe in every sense of the word. And the worst part? It was all preventable. The aftermath, a nation in ruins in the days that followed. The full scale of the disaster became clear. Over 300,000 people were left homeless. Entire businesses were wiped out. Schools, hospitals, and homes gone. Anger exploded across the country. Protesters took to the streets demanding answers, demanding justice, demanding accountability. But justice was slow, agonizingly slow. The government launched an investigation. Dozens of port officials were arrested. But as months passed, the investigation stalled. Judges were pressured. Witnesses were silenced. Political factions fought over who should be blamed. The lead judge, Fadi Sowan, was removed from the case after charging the former ministers with negligence. Another judge, Tariq Bitter, took over but faced even greater resistance. Politicians refused to be questioned. Immunities were invoked. Threats were made. In a country where no high-ranking official has ever been held accountable for corruption or negligence, many feared this would be no different. The deeper rot, corruption, collapse, and crisis Beirut blast didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the tragic result of a much deeper rot. Lebanon has long suffered from systemic corruption. Decades of mismanagement, patronage networks, and sectarian division have hollowed out the state's ability to function. Power outages, garbage crises, water shortages, these have become everyday life for Lebanese citizens, and the economic collapse that followed the blast only made things worse. The Lebanese pound lost over 90% of its value. Banks froze withdrawals. Middle-class families fell into poverty. Doctors fled. Students emigrated. A once thriving country teetered on the brink of becoming a failed state. The explosion became a symbol not just of a single disaster but of everything that was broken. And while the world sent aid and NGOs mobilized, the people of Lebanon were left to rebuild largely on their own. The human stories, faces behind the numbers, behind the headlines and statistics, are real human stories. Iskandar Nayar, a 3-year-old boy, was playing near a window when the blast struck. Shards of glass ripped into his tiny body. He died later in the hospital. His parents never got to say goodbye. Alexandra Magyar, a bright, vivacious 3-year-old girl, was in her home with her parents when the blast hit. She died from head injuries days later. Her face became a symbol of Lebanon's lost future. Firefighter Sahar Fairs, just 25 years old, was among the first responders. She and her team rushed into the burning port, unaware of the danger. None of them came out alive. These were not statistics. These were lives, stories, futures stolen in a blink. Not by fate, but by failure. Where are we now? Nearly 5 years later, the wreckage still lingers, physically, emotionally, and politically. Reconstruction has been slow. Many of the affected areas remain in ruins. Thousands of families still live in damaged homes. Businesses have not reopened. The investigation remains frozen. Judges have been dismissed. Legal challenges have buried the case in procedural chaos. No minister, no senior official, no government figure has been held accountable. International bodies have called for an independent probe, but Lebanese authorities have resisted. Victims' families continue to hold weekly vigils. They want justice. They want the truth, but hope is fading. The Beirut blast has become more than a tragedy. It has become a test of Lebanon's soul, whether the country can rise above its broken system or continue to sink into deeper dysfunction. What the world must learn: Beirut blast was not just a Lebanese disaster. It was a global warning. It showed what happens when dangerous materials are ignored, when corruption is tolerated, when bureaucracies fail to act, and when warnings go unanswered. It also showed the incredible resilience of people. In the days after the explosion, thousands of Lebanese citizens took to the streets not in protest, but with brooms, water, food, and compassion. They cleaned the streets, rescued the injured, comforted the grieving. They did what the state could not, but resilience is not enough. What Lebanon needs and what the world must learn is that without accountability, without justice, without reform, the next disaster is always waiting. Final thoughts. Remember, Beirut explosion was not just a tragedy of materials, it was a tragedy of silence, a warning ignored, a duty abandoned, a system so entangled in self-preservation that it chose bureaucracy over human lives. And when the smoke cleared, it wasn't just glass and concrete that had shattered, it was trust. It was hope. It was the belief that someone, somewhere, was watching out for the people. But the most painful truth, this didn't have to happen. The 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate that ripped through Beirut didn't arrive by accident. They stayed there because no one moved them, because no one was brave enough or honest enough to take responsibility. That kind of negligence doesn't come from one person. It comes from a culture of corruption, from a government that saw risk and turned away, from a chain of officials who passed the problem along until the problem exploded. And now, nearly 5 years later, the crater still sits at the edge of the city, still empty, still unhealed. Just like the people, for every shattered window, there is a mother who lost her child. For every collapsed wall, there is a firefighter who never came home. For every life destroyed, there is still no justice. The families are still waiting. The The victims still cry out from the silence, and the city still remembers, but remembering isn't enough. The world watched Beirut explode, the footage was shared, the hashtags trended, the donations poured in. But justice didn't come with the headlines. It doesn't come with sympathy alone. It comes with pressure, with truth, with accountability. Because if a city can be leveled by no negligence, and the world moves on without answers, then the same thing can happen again anywhere. Beirut's pain is a global warning. A warning about what happens when governments are allowed to rot, when power replaces protection, when warnings become whispers and then echoes and then screams. So remember this, the Beirut blast wasn't an accident, it was an outcome. And if the world forgets Beirut, if we look away, then we are complicit in whatever comes next.